Okay, well, we'll jump right on in. Welcome everyone to our session this afternoon on supporting mental health in children and youth. The information today is a brief introduction to mental health issues, but we hope that it will provide you with some really helpful information as you support kids and teens in your community. We come to you through a partnership between the Mental Health Foundation and Alberta Health Services. My name is Renata Logan, and I'm a mental health educator with the Children, Youth and Families Addiction and Mental Health team within Alberta Health Services. I'm also a registered psychologist who has been supporting families in the Edmonton zone for the better part of 18 years now. And my co-host, David, will be guiding us through the second half of today's presentation. David, a few words for our group.
Yeah, hey everyone, great to be with you today. I also am a mental health educator with Alberta Health Services. My background, I'm an occupational therapist and a counseling therapist. I've worked as a consultant in the schools with kids from kind of K to 12, and I've also worked with younger kids and families working in the homes, and I've worked in clinics as well. So this is a topic close to my heart, so I'm happy to be able to talk to you today. I'm going to shut off my camera and I'll rejoin you for the second half. Thanks again.
That's great. Thanks, David. Okay, so just a little disclaimer here. Although we hope to provide you with a bunch of really helpful information, by no means should this be used as a supplement to the information provided to you by a therapist, doctor, or healthcare professional. So it isn't to be used in place of actual medical advice, instruction, and/or formal treatment. So if you have any specific questions or concerns for a youth under your care, please contact a mental health therapist, doctor, or other healthcare professional working as part of their team. Now, there's going to be opportunities today for you to participate in some interactive discussion with us, and we're going to use this using the chat feature, which all of you are very familiar with. Once you open the chat icon, you'll have the single option of directing your chats to David and I, so your chats will only be seen by us two, and your identity will not be shared. And we're only going to use the chat for these discussions. If you have any specific questions, if there's a little bit of time towards the end, we might invite you to share those via the chat. Okay, now in her keynote today, Dr. Gale did such a wonderful job of exploring much of what we would have liked to have covered with you today. But because we only have a short time together, we're going to have just a quick look at what mental health is, then move into some common issues and behaviors that children with mental health challenges will experience. And then we're going to look at some strategies to help them regulate, relate, and reason as they're experiencing these challenges. So we're going to get more specific on what that means. And finally, we'll touch on some resources for further support. So we're going to open with an exploration of what is mental health. And we're going to start with a chat. Let's brainstorm, everyone. Share your responses via the chat, but what words come to mind when you think of mental health? Right? That term, mental health, what does it mean to you? And let's just kind of share it together, and we're going to pop some of the answers up on the screen. Let's see what some of the responses are. I know when I think of mental, one of you said fluid. I love that. Yes, there is kind of a fluidity to how we experience our mental health, very much so. I love that description. It's not just one thing, and it's always moving and changing and shifting. One of you shared that it's kind of, there's confusion around mental health. We can experience our mental health as a confused state. That it's very diverse, right? There's very multiple colors and factors and experiences, taste, textures to how we experience our mental health. And yes, it's different for everyone, right? There's not a one fits all kind of mental health, or there's not the optimal mental health, okay? It's very personal to us, as many of you shared. I love these answers, right? Any other words? We'll maybe move on here quickly. We're kind of on a similar rhythm here as to how mental health is unique to us. Oh, I love how one of you shared it can appear invisible to the public. Yes, especially if there's so much stigma around it still. So thank you for sharing. We're trying to make it more visible. So we're having, active dialogue around it, such as today, because mental health is something we all experience and or want to have a better understanding of, so we can further enhance and support our mental health, and particularly that of our kids. So thank you for your responses, everyone. So today, as we think about how we view mental health, let's also think about how we view the kids experiencing these challenges. And here's the clip to help us getting sort of thinking along this plane.
You probably think you know me. I'm the loud one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't listen.
The one with the short attention span.
The one at the back who never makes a contribution.
The one with no boundaries.
The one with no friends. The one who's too helpful.
The one who flies off the handle.
The one who is always showing off.
The one who can't help lying.
The one with the temper.
The one with the issues. The needy one, the angry one, the stupid one. But you don't know me at all. That's just what you see on the outside. That's not me. I'm inside. And no one sees inside. Because inside, I'm hurting.
Such a touching video there. Yeah, we often don't see it, right? Mental health has been invisible to us in many ways, and we don't want it to remain visible. So again, as we discuss common mental health challenges, remember that even if you have experience with some of these challenges, either in yourself or through your work with children and youth, everyone's experience is unique and needs your understanding and empathy, as many of you so astutely pointed out in our discussion.
You probably think
We'll just go forward rather than backwards. Okay, so the Mental Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being where every individual can realize their own potential, right? So they can just somehow fulfill their purpose, whatever that might mean for them. And that means they can cope with the normal stresses of life, as well as maybe some bigger stressors. They can also work productively and fruitfully and are able to kind of learn and grow and keep developing, and that this ultimately helps them to make a contribution to their own community. So our mental health really is our mental well-being and our ability to overcome the challenges that we face in life with resiliency and optimism. It involves our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, our ability to solve problems, our social connections, and our understanding of the world around us. So there really is no health without mental health. Now, we sometimes consider mental health as secondary to physical health, but in reality, all parts of our health are interconnected. Just as we are familiar with the wellness wheel, it's very holistic, right? We don't want to separate any of those important facets of our human experience. Now, we all have different states of mental health throughout our lifetimes, and this diagram shows the different interrelated levels of mental health, and it's going to make sense in a moment here. So right at the bottom, we see the mental health state of no distress. Now, this is where many of us live most of the time, fortunately, okay? And these are the times when we're generally positive, we're pretty well regulated, we're open, we're exploring, and we're able to take on what the day has in store. So we're feeling more or less on top of our game, and we're doing okay. This state is universal. In other words, everyone's going to experience times of zero distress, thankfully. Now, moving up the pyramid, we see mental distress, which is this kind of the brain's expected and usual increased response to the stressors of everyday life. So maybe some really hard exams, hard work projects, intensity in relationship, sort of those everyday disappointments that we experience. Now, this type of stress really gets us going, okay? It gets us focused and motivated. It helps us to perform. So we don't want to see it as a negative, because in actuality, it's helpful and necessary for our ability to adapt, learn, cope, and grow. Now, of course, everyday stress does not need any formal treatment or intervention, as again, this is just a short-term response to everyday stress, and it's our body is able to return or bounce back to that state of no distress relatively quickly. And again, this is universal. Everyone experiences some minor distress at some point every day or within their week. And then moving up, we have a mental health problem. Now, this is the brain's response to a more severe and persistent life problem, such as the death of a family member, or some severe bullying or harassment. Maybe there's divorce or separation between parents, burnout, that sort of thing. So with mental health problems, our ability to adapt and recover may be challenged. So it's going to take a bit longer, and these challenges are going to require more of our focused attention, our conscious attention, and more of our time, as well as maybe some additional support through our faith community, through support of colleagues, friends, maybe a counselor or therapist. However, it doesn't require that formal support or treatment. And again, these mental health problems are also universal. We can all expect to have some of these challenges at some point in our lives. Now, right at the top, we have mental illness, disorder, or a condition. Now, this is a smaller section at the top of the pyramid because it is not universal. Okay, not everyone experiences. Now, even though that's the case, that it's not true for everyone, it is still quite pervasive in that about 20% of us will be diagnosed with a mental health disorder at some point in our lifetime. So 1 in 5 of us is going to have a mental health disorder condition that we're having to work through at some point. Now, even with that, so in that state, when there's a disorder we're working through, our brain is just not functioning in a typical way, which is, it's just not working at its optimal. And this is then leading to some pretty significant and persistent problems in our overall life. Okay, so these types of conditions are going to need some extra support for recovery to happen, which could include the necessity of them being diagnosed and treated by some trained mental health professionals that are using valid assessments and treatments. Now, that said, having a mental health disorder condition doesn't mean that you will always have poor mental health. Okay, I'll say that again. A mental health disorder doesn't mean you're going to have poor mental health. With some effective treatments and strategies, it is possible to have good mental health, even when you're going through a mental health condition or disorder. In fact, some people might actually be in all of these states of the pyramid on any given day. So we'll go through an example. A child can have ADHD. So right at the top, she's got a mental health condition. And then maybe her parents are going through a separation or a divorce. So we're going to equate this as a mental health problem because that's a pretty big deal in a child's life. And then maybe earlier today, she missed the school bus and this caused her some temporary distress because she really likes to get to school on time. And then later, right now, after she's settled into her class, she's hanging out with friends at recess and she's enjoying herself. So there's no distress. But she was going through all of those levels on any given point in the day. So just some important distinctions there. Now, if we were to look at all the stats around mental health, we would see that unfortunately mental health issues are really prevalent among children and youth today. Particularly after a global pandemic in times like these, it's going to become even more important for care providers such as yourself to be intentional in supporting the mental wellness of children and youth. As mentioned, about 20% or 1 in 5 kids are going to experience a mental health disorder or illness at some point in their life. And these sorts of conditions usually start, or the onset begins between the ages of 12 and 25. So an adult who's experiencing a mental health disorder later in life quite probably had it first begin in adolescence. And that's why early intervention is key. The earlier support, the better. Okay, so we're gonna now, this is where, with your awareness and understanding in how you work with kids going through these challenges, you're gonna be that much more available to give them the arsenal they need so that it's not such a tough ride later in life. Now, even though with mental health disorders, there is going to need to be some involvement by trained clinicians, this doesn't remove your good influence. So we're going to take a look at some of the common mental health challenges faced by many of our children and teens today. And that big one, of course, is anxiety. Right. So we're going to watch a video geared towards teenagers that explains to them what's going on in their brains and bodies when we're experiencing high anxiety.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
So lots of helpful things there. Just a quick note, everyone, if you really liked that video or want to review it again, we're going to send you a link towards the end of the session today that's going to give you access to the links to these videos as well as a few different resources. So stay tuned. So as the video showed us, anxiety is our body's way of really trying to protect us. So we don't want to get rid of it. But we also don't want it to control us or have it trigger really kind of an unnecessary or over strong stress response, right? It's kind of our internal alarm over responding or false alarming. Now, when clinicians look at treating anxiety or helping kids with anxiety, they're really looking at the anxiety triad, which is kind of 3 different areas of how we experience anxiety. And the first big one is, of course, how it activates our body, right? Anxiety can be really uncomfortable in how it gets our body going. And kids, of course, experience this just as much as we do. So there's going to be all of these symptoms that I'm popping up on the screen here. We're going to see this typically for kids as well as adults when they're anxious. Now, in kids who don't have the ability to recognize anxiety symptoms, they may complain more of stomach aches and headaches. But of course, we want to rule that out first through a medical professional or a doctor as to whether there's something medically there. But if there isn't, we still want to remember that if these symptoms are anxiety driven, they're still very real to the child and the youth, and we want to take them seriously. Anxiety also really gets our thoughts going, and we get all sorts of wonky beliefs about ourselves, the world, and the people around us. So we know that with anxious kids, they're going to tend to overestimate how likely an unpleasant event will happen. Okay, all those what ifs are threading through their mind, and it's usually the worst case scenario. Overestimate how likely it will happen, as well as how bad it's going to be, right? They're going to think of, again, the worst part of it rather than kind of be able to see the gray area. Meanwhile, they're going to underestimate their ability to cope with it, the anxiety as well as that unpleasant event. So they just feel like they're getting like the double whammy or the triple whammy from all directions, right? It's going to be super bad and I'm not going to be able to handle it, is really what's kind of running through their minds. So we're looking to help them to shift beyond those thoughts. And then finally, in terms of behavior, we're going to see all sorts of things in kids and teens who could be anxious. And the first one, well, is they could be more of those turtling kids, right? They could be quieter, they're withdrawing, appear more tired, they're kind of vigilant and watching for danger. There's kind of that avoiding sort of piece going on. They might be more clingy or over dependent on their caregivers, where they're seeking lots of reassurance or seem to be scared to try things on their own. And then for some, where the anxiety is particularly overwhelming, they could present as extra restless, irritable, or even aggressive. So we'll see more of those angry outbursts or meltdowns happening. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit to avoidance here. They're going to probably want to avoid certain situations, and avoidance is true to all of us experiencing anxiety, right? It's somewhat natural. We're going to instinctively want to move away from anything that's painful or distressing, right? That's our instinct. The problem is, in the long run, avoidance doesn't help. Okay, it actually increases our stress response over time. The more we avoid, the worse it gets. And so treatment or recovery is helping kids to face their fears and those anxious, provoking situations with coping skills, with strategies to help them to be successful. Okay, so moving on, some of these signs or symptoms for anxiety can also be seen in kids who are experiencing depression. So we're going to touch a little bit on depression, but first distinguish the difference between normal sadness and depression. So it isn't always clear to us if a child or youth is actually dealing with depression or if it's just sadness. You know, sadness is a normal emotion we're all going to experience at various times. And so people will sometimes use the word depression to describe a time of sadness when they're just a little low or blue. So which is which? We need to look for other signs to see what the child is actually experiencing. Now, with normal sadness, it's usually following a stressful event, okay? There's usually a trigger for the sadness in some way. And the sad feelings will usually fade within about 2 weeks, so they don't stick around. And they can, while they're significant and very uncomfortable, they can also be interrupted or even disappear when doing activities or spending time with others. So it's easier to positively distract ourselves when we're sad. Now, and with sadness, the child or teen is usually able to learn new coping strategies to get back to normal. So they're even going to feel more equipped to deal with similar situations in the future. So that's kind of what we would deem as normal sadness. But with depression, a child or teen is having significant sadness for a longer period of time, and this is affecting their overall functioning over very different parts of their life, okay? This could be what start to become a clinical form of depression, which is a very real medical condition with a variety of symptoms. Just to quickly go through, their level of sadness, irritability, or despair can last for weeks, months, or even longer. So it's more than just feeling down. And where regular sadness usually occurs in response to a specific trigger, with depression, those changes in mood may happen regardless of what's going on for the child or youth. So there isn't always a specific triggering event. Clinical depression can also result from just an inability to solve a problem caused by an event. And so then there's feelings of overwhelming helplessness, hopelessness, or just being stuck. Like, I really don't know how to work through this. It's not getting better. It's starting to move into a big problem. And of course, these feelings can become quite debilitating, where the child or youth becomes more withdrawn, isolated, and is perhaps resorting to more unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as very extreme self-blame, guilt. They're extra super hard on themselves. They might be turning to substance use or even forms of self-harm. So these are pretty intense symptoms that are going to require some specialized support through psychological counseling or perhaps even medication as a buffer for a short time. Oops. So we're going to watch a video on depression in children, and it's going to mention some symptoms that are common for children and youth, but it will also mention some symptoms that are specific to just about every child.
We used to think that children could not get depressed. We used to think that they were emotionally immature or cognitively immature, but in fact, children, and even very young children, can get depressed. All children, as they grow up, will feel sad. It's part of growing up. It's part of learning how to regulate one's emotions. But some children will develop a sense of sadness which persists. And it is those children that we need to be worried about. Depression is associated with serious complications: poor school performance, impaired social relationships, a recurrence of depressive episodes or depressive disorder as they grow up, and in the worst case scenario, the end result may be suicide. So the main symptoms of depression are feeling sad for prolonged periods and with worsening of these feelings, and feeling as if fun has gone out of life.
Parents and teachers are often the first to identify the symptoms of depression in young people. Some cases might be obvious, others less so. If children are visibly unhappy or uncharacteristically irritable for at least 2 to 4 weeks, with these feelings lingering or worsening, they may be depressed. A child suffering from depression may have difficulty concentrating in the classroom, appearing persistently irritable, worried, tearful, moody, or bored. Problems with sleeping, overeating, and undereating are also common. Any risk-taking behaviors, suicidal thoughts, or evidence of self-harm must be addressed without delay. Many of these symptoms can be found in people suffering from depression at any age, but there are additional symptoms that can be visible, more specifically in young people. Young children who complain persistently of aches and pains or other non-specific physical discomfort may be depressed. Teachers and parents might notice changes in peer relationships or social withdrawal. Children may not want to play and visibly lack enjoyment in activities. They may not want to spend time with family and friends and isolate themselves, but equally they may be clingy and unwilling to separate from them.
Okay, that was a quick cutoff there. So, now, we've talked about some of the signs and symptoms of kids who are experiencing a mental health challenge, and specifically anxiety and depression, but we're going to look at some more common behaviors that we might see in kids where the intensity of the emotion is getting so great that it's coming out in their behavior in a big way. And this is specific to meltdowns and shutdowns. So we're just going to have a quick look at that. Okay, so some of you might have heard these terms, externalizing, internalizing. We're going to kind of just dumb it down a little bit and look at how it is that we do these things. We all kind of externalize or internalize on some level. Now with externalizing, this is where the emotion is getting so great that we just need to discharge it from our body really quickly. So with kids, this is going to come out as maybe more of screaming, throwing things. They're visibly angry or upset. They're just showing kind of more aggression, such as wanting to fight with peers or engage in some fighting. We may feel like they're being more defiant and not following directions. So we see these kids as similar to that lion's roar. Okay, these behaviors are easy to see, they're easy to hear, they're really visible, they're really out there, and they're getting everyone's attention. And it can be sometimes a challenge to be around. They might be heading into a meltdown here. Okay, and if that's the case, we're going to need them to help them, which David's going to help us, David's going to lead us through in a moment. Now with other kids, it might be that they're going to internalize their struggles. Okay, they're going to bring everything inward. They're going to try to avoid stressful situations. They're going to appear more sad or anxious. They may talk really negatively about themselves. There's just that general sort of withdrawal, avoidance. Or we might liken them to the turtles, right? They're just turtling in their shell. And they could be close to what we would call a shutdown, right? Where they're just kind of blanking out and almost dissociating, right? So we're going to need to help these kids get energized again and out of their shell. Now, every child or teen may display these behaviors at times, but in those times when they're too overwhelmed or too worked up, they're gonna, again, it can go ramp up to those extreme versions such as the meltdown or shutdown when their behavior is no longer a choice. Okay, they're not actively choosing this. They don't have any control. Their bodies are just too flooded with their emotion. They're unable to cope. And when this happens, they need our help more than ever. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's just actually move into that. This was just a quick note to slide to acknowledge that typically our lions are going to get more of the attention because it's more visceral out there. We're kind of actively needing to manage lions more, but we want to forget that our internalizing kids, our kids who are turtling, we need to ensure they're not left under the radar, right? That they're not forgotten, that we're paying attention to those kids and teens who are particularly quiet as well. Okay, so David's going to pop on in here now and really move into the nuts and bolts of why we're here, which is how can we help? And that starts with creating understanding and getting to kind of that level with the kids we work with so that they know we're that trustworthy person that's going to help them through a really tough moment. And there he is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Renata. So here we are, and we want to look now at what can we do when we see children and youth that you're working with that are having a hard time. So the first strategy really is understanding. When you become more aware of what is really going on, maybe with the child's mind and body, some of those things that Renata had talked about, during these challenging behaviors that you might see, you'll be more equipped to support them with compassion. Now, all behavior is actually communication. When kids or teens are displaying challenging behavior, they're really just trying to communicate something to us, but really that they have an unmet need or maybe a lagging skill for what we've asked them to do. Now, it sometimes can help to look at this through the analogy of an iceberg. Sometimes, like with an iceberg, we only see what's on the surface with what's going on with the kids we're working with. So the unexpected or challenging behavior is what we see. But what you may not see or be aware of is everything else that's going on underneath the surface. So the child's, cause of behavior, which can be their biology, their emotions, some mental health distress or challenges they might be experiencing. And oftentimes our kids might not even be aware of this. And they may not realize what they're experiencing. And what we see is them doing the best they can with what they're feeling, and also probably reaching out to us for help. So that's because when our emotions are high, our ability to understand things and to communicate and think things through reduces. And this is true of kids and adults. Communication between our emotional brain and our thinking brain, it really gets blocked. So we're going to watch a video that demonstrates what we call the hand-brain model, which can help kids to better understand what is happening in their brains leading up to when they might be having some experiencing some emotional distress or having a meltdown or shutdown. Let's go ahead and watch.
Your upstairs and downstairs brain don't work alone. Your brain is set up so that the upstairs and downstairs brain can communicate with itself. It sends messages from section to section all the time about what our bodies feel and need. Let's take a closer look at our brain fist. Where our fingertips are is the logic and reasoning part of the brain that springs into action when we have a problem to solve, and usually it does a great job of doing it. But sometimes it can have a hard time solving a problem if the emotional brain and thinking brain can't communicate well enough. This can happen if your emotions get too overwhelming and your downstairs brain decides that this situation might be dangerous, even if it isn't really. And we all know what happens when our downstairs brain thinks you're in danger. It triggers our fight, flight, or freeze reflex. Our emotions start to bubble up, and then suddenly everything boils over. We flip our lids. This can look like a scary, angry reaction, or it might be crying or running away from a problem. Now that we've flipped our lids, see how far away our fingertips are from the midbrain? When our lids are flipped, our upstairs and downstairs brain can't talk to each other. Our emotions have become too strong, and we can't think clearly and can't solve the problem in a peaceful way.
Now, something that Dr. Gale had mentioned is that there's this sense that children need help and support in learning to have empathy. And what's interesting about what we just learned about when kids flip their lid, actually the empathy center is also in the cortex, or the part of our brain that tends to get flipped when our kids are experiencing high levels of distress. And so one way that we can help them with their empathy is help them to be calm and regulated. So when children and youth are flooded with these big, strong emotions, they are no longer in control of their bodies or able to be reasoned with. Their lower brain's emotional responses, they're really blocking access to their ability to think clearly and to communicate with those who care for them, so such as you. Now, these kids and teens, they need your help. One way that you can help them is through what we call the 3 R's, which is to regulate, relate, and reason. Now, first, we want to help kids to regulate or calm their overwhelming feelings and the stress they're experiencing in their bodies. Then we're able to really relate with them, have a moment of connection, maybe repair if there was some challenging moments. And once a child's thinking is back online, because we first regulated with them and related with them, that's when we can move to reasoning with them or talking it through. Often as adults and young adults, we often, we tend to use our reasoning brains quite readily, and we try to reason kids through things. And often what we need first is that regulation and the relation. So let's look at that. Let's look at the first R, which is to regulate. With this strategy, we're not just asking kids and teens to regulate themselves, because remember, they're overwhelmed and they probably can't do it right now when they're feeling strong emotions or they're experiencing mental distress. They need you to help them get regulated. And so where you respond to their chaos with compassion, you invite them into your calm. You help get them regulated with you. Getting regulated or calm together, that's called co-regulation. So let's just brainstorm. Let's see if we can get 5 ideas into the chat, and we'll write them on the screen here. I'm curious to know, what are some things that you do with the children and youth that you work with? How do you help them get calm and regulated? Go ahead and answer those right into the chat. What are some tips and tricks, things that you've done? Yeah, so one of you mentioned removing them from the situation that might be causing them to be triggered in their emotions. Encourage them to follow your breaths. What a great strategy, right? Because ideally, you're still in a place of feeling calm, you're breathing slowly. So encourage them to follow your breathing. Make mindfulness activities fun. I love that idea. Mindfulness or grounding activities where we help get our brains into the present, grounded, making it fun is the way that especially the younger kids are going to want to do those things with you. Take a seat, right? Drink some water. What a good strategy. In fact, there's a lot of science behind that one. When we are stressed and we're in stress response mode and having mental distress, oftentimes our digestion slows down. And when we drink some water, we kind of kickstart that digestion again, and we kickstart the parasympathetic nervous system in helping us to calm down. Awesome. Those are some great ideas. So just a couple ideas, I know, and I know many of you have many more wonderful ideas. We're going to go through a couple ideas together, and we're going to send you some handouts that you can use that hopefully will support you in the work that you do with children and adolescents. So, as many of you mentioned, there are different coping tools that we can coach kids and teens to use to actually reduce their body's stress when they're experiencing mental distress. Now, one really effective tool is deep breathing. Now, deep breathing activities such as the one here on the screen, which I'll show you in just a moment, they can assist us in taking a moment to stop, to calm, and to regroup. And deep breathing actually also helps to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So it can help to reboot our calming mechanisms. So this one we have on the screen here, we're going to send you a handout for this. You can use this as a poster with your kids. With the older kids, you might just say, hey, let's take 5 together. With the younger kids, you can say, let's do some starfish breathing. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. But the idea is that you trace your finger as you breathe. So tracing up, you breathe in, and then out and exhale. And then you go again. and you just carry on. We like this one. We promote this one quite a lot in our sessions because it's a handy one to do. And when kids and teens do 5 good deep breaths, that's often enough to kickstart that parasympathetic nervous system. Some kids you may need to take 10 with. One thing that I'll just recommend that you do is do this in a co-regulation mindset. So doing it together, and you'll want to maybe set the pacing, especially for younger kids. They tend to breathe really fast and do it quickly, but if you can set the pace to go slowly and deeply, that will be really helpful. Now, another helpful strategy is to engage in regular movement breaks throughout the day. So these brief and fun movement breaks, dance parties, stretching, jumping, getting outside, doing things, they can be done on a routine schedule, or they can be just kind of done in the moment as needed. Changing the environment can also really help. So stepping outside and getting some fresh air, feeling the grass, with bare feet, things like that. Now, another tool that you can use and kind of prepare ahead of time is what we call a calming kit. And we're going to send you a couple handouts that have some tools and ideas you can use for younger kids as well as for teenagers. But basically, a calming kit is a container filled with some items that can help children and youth to calm their nervous system when they're feeling distressed. And really, it's, everyone's individual, so different people have different preferences. Some people like to have, squeeze and release. So that's why we have some stress balls in there. Some people like to have certain scents or smells that they like to calm themselves, or just keeping active, like doing some coloring or playing with a Rubik's Cube. One that I've done in the past that's really fun and effective is the really small Play-Doh little kits that you can get, the really small ones. You can actually put a drop or two of essential oil in them. So for yellow, you can put in some lemon. Orange, you can put in some orange. And then kids have something small that they can kind of get that deep pressure with by playing in their hands, but also get a calming scent. Again, I would just say that this is all individualized. And so if you have some of these tools on hand where you work, try them out with the kids you work with, see what they like, and kind of figure that out together. The other kind of thing to mention is practice using these things when kids are calm. That's when they'll be more receptive to using them. Now, these types of tools can be used, again, like I said, when kids are calm, as well as when you start to just notice that kids are starting to become a little bit agitated and are experiencing maybe some strong emotions or some mental distress. When things are just starting to ramp up, sometimes we can prevent kids from getting into a full-on kind of meltdown or shutdown just by checking in with them, encouraging them to take a breath, as we talked about, doing some stretches. However, sometimes kids and teens, they might need some additional support. So if the child or youth you're working with is becoming upset, but you are able to stay calm, that's when we would recommend that you invite them to have what we call a time in with them, where you can have some time to co-regulate. So in a time in, you stay with the child or youth, you gently encourage them to try some coping tools, but maybe they're not in a place where they can do that. And really what you're going to do is just sit there and be present with them, or not sitting necessarily, but just being present with them where they are. And maybe you're modeling your own calm, if you're able to stay calm, by doing some deep breathing yourself or trying a calming tool. And then, when kids start to come back by starting to calm a bit, they may be more receptive to using some of those tools with you. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where the child or teen is upset that you're working with, but you also are upset, and you're not in a place of calm, you may need to take just a small time out for yourself to get yourself kind of calm and collected. And then once you're calm, then you'll be able to move into that time in with the child or youth you're working with. Now, once the child or the teen is starting to become calmer, we can start to re-engage with them and relate with them in a positive way. Now, how might we know when it's time to re-engage with the child and reconnect with them? That's always a little bit tricky. Now, first, we want to just follow their cues. So we want to pay attention to them, to watch the signs for when they're maybe coming down from that flipping of the lid, starting to come down from maybe a meltdown or a shutdown. So we can watch their intensity, their body language, their facial cues, how fast or rapid or how slowly their breathing is, and as well as their behavior. Now, we like to kind of use the popcorn analogy for this, right? If you make microwave popcorn, how do you know when it's done? Really? And there's special microwaves that try to have a special button for that, but they don't always work. And often the best way is to just listen, right? Listen to the pops and recognize when they're becoming less frequent. And now the popcorn's probably ready. So it's the same with our kids, right? Being present with them, listening, watching, and noticing when they're ready to re-engage with you. Now, in a meltdown, maybe a child is starting to yell less. In a shutdown, maybe they're starting to say a few words, and their breathing changes, as I mentioned. Now, at that point, we would want you just to invite them into a time of non-judgmental reconnection. So often, having mental distress or strong emotional triggers or situations that our kids go through, that comes out as unwanted behaviors. Well, the kids often don't want those behaviors either. And sometimes they feel embarrassed after going through them. So just try to do your best to reconnect with them through non-judgment. Now, also remember, as I said, they probably feel bad about what's happened. That's why we mentioned just reconnect without judgment. They already feel bad about this. So reminding them of what just happened or kind of delving into it right then and there is probably not the right approach. Instead, we want to show them your care, that you continue to help them finding calm. And if there's any kind of, mess or upheaval from a meltdown in particular, it's okay to ask them to kind of help you with restoring some of that. Now, I'm curious, in the work that you do, working with children and adolescents, what are some of the special ways that you build connection with children and youth? One thing I would say is, of everything that we're talking to you about today, connection would be the most important thing. You need to connect with kids for them to be willing to regulate with you. You need to connect with them during moments of distress. And then you need to connect with them afterwards as well. So we'll talk about that more. But in the chat, if you could just write down a couple ideas that we'll brainstorm. What are some of your favorite ways of connecting with children and youth? How do you really show them that you're connecting? Yeah, this is a great one here. Be curious about them, right? And curiosity is a great thing. You can ask them some non-threatening questions by just being curious and showing that you're interested in them. Listening to music, that's another great one. Finding something you both like, right? Like if you both can find a song that you both like and connecting over that. Getting to their level, that's a great suggestion, especially for the younger kids who are shorter than us. It can be intimidating to talk to adults or to young adults that are a lot bigger than them. Someone else mentioned initiating some conversation by kind of inquiring about their interests and sharing your interests, doing an activity with them that they enjoy. And these are great ways to build connection. So, with you and the work that you do and each individual child, it's finding what works for that child. But the main thing is just showing them your empathy by finding ways to connect with them. And when there are those moments that are challenging, trying to refrain from judgment. Okay, so we'll move on here. Now, those were some good suggestions, and I know you have lots more of great things that you've done. The one that we want to highlight the most is to listen and validate emotions. So we want to let the kids know that we work with that it's okay to share their feelings. So one of the take-home messages is for you to be that person that, I got 2 minutes left, so I just see that. For you to be that person that they feel safe sharing their feelings with. And when they do share those feelings with you, for you to acknowledge and validate them. Try not to minimize and try not to go instantly into problem solving. We're going to send you a video link. I'd recommend you watch it. Some of you have seen this movie, Inside Out. There's just a wonderful clip where you see the difference between how joy interacts with Bing Bong when Bing Bong is having some mental distress, and how sadness interacts. I'd recommend you watch this and see what you can take from this video into your own work with children and youth. I just want to mention that now when we've done regulation, when we've done connection, that's when you're able to now do the talking and the reasoning. So sometime later when you're feeling regulated, the child's feeling regulated, that's when you're able to be curious, curiosity that one of you mentioned, brainstorm some ideas on how can we make this go better next time. Lastly, I just want to say that the last strategy really is to be aware of resources. So we're going to send you books. We're going to send you numbers that you can phone to access to support these children and youth from Alberta Health Services, from the wider community, okay, as well as some websites. And then lastly, there's our website as well, where you can find a lot of resources, sessions where we support caregivers of children and youth on a variety of topics. So I think we're going to get kicked out in well, I see here that I have 3 minutes remaining, I hope I do. I'm going to keep going if I do. Our takeaway message for today is that we want to thank you for joining us. And really, when we better understand and recognize the signs of mental health challenges in children and youth, we become more equipped to help them regulate, relate, and reason in ways that support their positive goals and the work of your programs. So today's learning is just kind of a beginning. There are many resources that you can access, and I hope that one of the takeaways from today is that you're able to look through the resources that we share, and we hope there'll be something in there that you found really, really supportive and helpful for the work that you do. And again, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left before I think we're all kicked out, but I'll just invite Renata back as well. And we're here to answer any questions. So I know some of that was really fast and furious, but I hope you found some benefit from today's session. Again, just to reiterate, sometimes our instinct is to talk kids through the challenges they're having. And the take home from today is to just remember to co-regulate and find calm together, to relate with them and connect. And when kids flip their lids, also in that part of the brain is the language center. And that's why talking usually isn't the best strategy when kids are in those moments. But once they've calmed and you've helped them find their calm, then in time, you're able to problem solve with them and talk it through. Wonderful. Let's see here. Do we have any questions? If anyone has questions, you're free to turn on your microphone, or you can ask them in the chat. So I see that 5-minute warning, I thought it was a 2-minute warning. So I was going really fast at the end there.
Yeah, we almost could have shown that video. I can't put my video on, David. I don't know why. So I'm just listening. Yeah. This is Renata, everyone. Like David mentioned, if you do have a moment later afternoon to watch that last video, it's really worth it. And to watch the entire movie, if you've seen it already, it's worth watching again. It's just a bit of a gold nugget of a movie. But we'll see what happens here.
Okay, so we'll get that link into we got 28 seconds, Renata. Can we do it?
Yeah, you can do it.
Let's see.
Or I can do it.
Okay, I got it. So yeah. I just put the link into the chat. If everyone wants to click that before we close out of here, then you'll have access to our resources. We'll also make sure that Sophia has these so that this can be sent out to you. Okay, thanks again, everybody, for your time. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.